Hey, it's Jeff with DaringDino.com. In this video, you will learn how to create a futuristic tunnel with JSPlacement in Blender. I'll cover how to use JSPlacement to create height maps, emission maps, and color maps, and set up true displacement to save time in modeling. So let's go ahead and get JSPlacement. I already have it pulled up in a browser over here. So you just need to go to windmillart.net, or you can just Google JSPlacement and download the version for your operating system. Once you have JSPlacement, you'll be able to launch the app and just click up here in the top left corner. And the first thing we'll do is use JSPlacement 2 with the crap pack, and then let's just hit R to generate a new map. And this looks pretty cool. So let's go ahead and save the height and the normal. So I'll just go ahead and save these both really quick. And I'll call this tutorial height. And then I'll save the normal map as well. And you have to give it a couple seconds to generate those. And then we're going to use this for the displacement of our tunnel. And then let's also jump over to the dot grid. And let's turn off all of the other options besides the solid square. And then let's generate a displacement map here. And we're just going to use this for our lights in our tunnel. It's very fast. We'll just save the height. And we'll call this tutorial lights. And if you want to change some of these values, you can definitely do that if you want the lights to be bigger or smaller. But you'll see how we don't even need to worry about that in just a second here. So we're done with JSPlacement for now. So let's go ahead and quit that and jump right into Blender. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up our cylinder, and I'm going to hit Shift A, add a mesh, and add a cylinder. For the cap fill type, go ahead and change that to nothing because we want our tunnel to be open, and also select Generate UVs. We'll just rotate it on the x-axis by hitting RX 90, and then we're going to scale it on the y-axis by 6, so hit SY6. So this is our tunnel, so let's go ahead and name it tunnel, and we'll be displacing this one, so we'll call it displace. Cool, and let's go ahead and save our file really quick. Next, we're going to add the camera, so Shift A to add a camera, Alt R to clear the rotation, RX 90, and then just move it back on the y-axis until it's almost at the back. And let's see what's going on through the camera by hitting 0 on our numpad. And we just want to make sure that the edge of the circle isn't too close to the edge. I'm actually going to move my camera a little bit forward with GY and then just drag down. Okay, that looks good. Perfect. Let's also make sure that our cylinder, our tunnel here, is set to smooth shading. And we can start to set up the displacement for this now. So let's jump into compositing mode here, add a new material, and I'm using cycles. And let's go ahead and set up our material. So I have Node Wrangler enabled. You can enable it in your user preferences. Just make sure you search for Node and enable Node Wrangler. Very helpful. I'm going to set up a basic image map for this by hitting Control T. Let's go ahead and open up our asset folder and grab our height map that we saved just a couple minutes ago. Great. And then instead of just affecting the color, I'm going to connect this to the displacement. I'm also going to use this texture though to influence the color of our tunnel here. So I'm going to Shift A, add a converter color ramp, and we're going to plug the color into the factor and then the color into our diffuse. Let's just give ourselves a little bit more room here so we can see exactly what's going on. Much better. And then I'm going to change the rightmost flag over here to about 30% gray. So just switch into HSV mode and change this to 0.3. Or close enough. It doesn't have to be exact. Now, in order for our displacement to work, we need to enable 3 different things. The first thing is we need to go over here to the rendering tab and go to experimental feature set. This enables true displacement, but we also have to turn it on for our objects as well. So then go to the materials property, go down here to settings, and in displacement, turn that to true. That will make it so that it doesn't just look like a bump map, it's actually displacing the geometry. And then the last thing we need to do is make sure that this has enough geometry. Right now it has 32 faces, which is not a lot, and it's going to look really bad if we just leave it like this. So an easy way to solve this is to add a subdivision surface modifier and enable adaptive dicing. And what this does is it uses the camera to figure out what parts need to be higher resolution than others, which saves a lot of time. And if you need to adjust this, this is the place to adjust the resolution of the subsurf. Let's also name our material tunnel displace, just so that we remember which one is which. And we'll just add a couple of lights to see what's going on really quick. So Shift A, add a lamp, a point lamp, and then we're going to Shift D, duplicate that and move it on the y-axis with GY and move it closer here. And then we're just going to set this light to be strength of 1000. And we're going to select this other lamp here and make sure its strength is at 1000 as well. And since we don't need it to be crazy high resolution or high quality, let's set the render samples to 10 and hit render. And give it a second to figure out the geometry of the object we just added. Awesome, and you can see that everything is working perfectly. It looks like we have tons of geometry going on here, but it's just using that image from JSPlacement to displace our mesh here, and it looks really cool. So now that we have verified that everything looks good, we're going to get rid of those 2 point lights by just removing them. And we're going to go ahead and start to add some lights. At this point though, you could do whatever you want, but I'll show you some really cool things that I learned in preparing for this tutorial. So the first thing we're going to do is Shift D to duplicate our tunnel, and then we'll just rename it to lights normal. And then I'm going to scale it down just a little bit, just so that it's inside of our mesh that we just set up here. And we're going to go over to compositing mode and make a new material for this. So to do this, I'm just going to click this little 2 and name this tunnel lights normal. And give it a quick save too. Cool. So what I will do is I will delete this color ramp, and I'm going to get rid of our displacement, and instead I'm going to make it where this diffuse shader is an emission shader, and a quick way to do that with Node Wrangler is hit Shift S and change it to an emission shader. And then I'm going to change the image that I'm using over here by clicking on this little open image icon, and I'm going to grab my lights image here, which looks like that. Then what I'll do is I'll connect the color to our emission strength, and then I'm also going to add a transparent shader, and you'll see why in a second. And I'm going to mix these by hitting Alt and right clicking to drag, and that will automatically mix these together. And just move these over here. Then what I'm going to do is use this image texture to drive the strength of our emission by going to converter math and drag it over here and change this to multiply. And then I'm going to change the value to 5. So if I preview what my material looks like right now, I can do that over here. You can see that it's kind of transparent, which is kind of a problem. So what we're going to do is use our image texture to drive this mix shader. So I'm just going to hit color, invert, and add it up here, and I'll use the color to invert our mix shader here. And now it's kind of hard to see, but only the lights are showing up. Another thing that you'll want to do is remove the subdivision surface modifier from our lights because we don't need it at all. Then you could change the lights color by changing this emission value. So I'm just going to make them slightly blue like that. But you could also do a bunch of other things, like use a color ramp to change the lights to be different colors based on how bright they are, or whatever you want. Cool, so let's see what the camera kind of sees now. Awesome, our lights are starting to come in. And let me change my world to be a black world where it's just a black color, just so that we can see just what we're working on here. Awesome. This is starting to come together pretty well. You can't see the displacement cylinder tunnel that we added first, but we'll see that more as we start to work on this some more. So let's duplicate our tunnel lights by hitting Shift D, and then I'm just going to rotate it from here, and then I'm going to make a new version of this tunnel lights material by clicking this too, and then I'm going to call this large. And then what I'll do is change the scale down to 0.5. And a quick way to do that for all three is to hold Shift and click and drag down, and then you can just type 0.5, hit enter, and save that. And now if we see what's going on, now we've got small and big lights. And if you want your big lights to be bigger, just make this scale value smaller, like say 0.2, and that will make some of the lights pretty big, which that kind of looks cool. I'm going to go back though and just change that to 0.5 and save. Then we're going to duplicate our lights again by hitting Shift D, hit enter to keep it in place, and then rotate it a little bit more. We're going to make a duplication of this material, and instead of large, this is going to be called stretched. And we'll change our scale values to 1, 0.1, and 1. And then change the linear interpolation to closest. And what that will do is it'll make it so that instead of trying to alias between the edges of the squares, it'll just keep it nice and blocky as a square. So if we look at that, now we can see these big bars on the sides that almost look like neon lights or something like that. So we're getting there. And we barely did any modeling at all. So let's just save that again. Another thing you'll want to do is make sure in your scene settings that you go to color management and change it to filmic. And I'll just use the base contrast for now. And what this does is it makes the bright lights look better, which is very important for this rendering scene. All right, we're going to switch back to default view here and go into side view. And we're going to add some circles. I'm going to add a circle up here and one back here. So the reason we're doing this is just to add some lights into the scene that will bounce off of different things and look really cool. So let's jump back to front view and hit Shift A, add a mesh, circle, and fill type. Let's make it N-gon. We don't need UVs, and if we align it to view, it snaps perfectly into its place. Then I'll go into edit mode with tab and inset this face, and right about there, and then we're going to delete this big face so that we just kind of have a little ring. So we'll delete that face, select everything with A, and I'm just going to extrude this back with E and then hit Y and drag it back just a little. It looks like I'm only dragging it like 4 centimeters or 0.04. And I'm going to rename this to be ring light large, or ring light front, because there's one in the front and one in the back. And then I'm going to Shift D to duplicate this, drag it to the back, probably about there. And then I'm going to go to edit mode in front view. I'm going to scale this one down. Oops, I need to select everything with A, then scale it down. And then I'm going to select just these inner edges with Alt, Shift, right click, and then scale those down to make them a little bit bigger, like something like that. And we might work on this a little bit when we get further along. And I'm going to change this one to be ring light back. And then we're going to set up subsurf for both of these at just level 1 with Control 1, or you could always go into the modifiers panel here and set that up. And make sure that shading is set to smooth. All right, so now we're going to add a shader for these because right now they have nothing. So let's go into compositing view and make sure that our ring is selected here, and it is, and hit new shader. And we're going to switch this to emission right away with Shift S and change it to emission. And then we're going to make this go into the volume instead of the surface. And what this does is it makes it where the light is coming from inside of our object instead of just the edges, which can do some pretty cool things. All right, so we're actually going to duplicate this emission shader with Shift D, and then we're going to add them together with Control and plus, and then just move this over here. Oops. Just grab those and move them just to make this make a little bit more sense. And for this top one, we're going to go with a light blue color. I'll show you the hex code in case you're wondering what that looks like. So we'll just use that. And then for this bottom one, we're going to copy that color with Control-Z, Control-V, and we're going to make it a little bit darker of a color here. Awesome. And we're going to set this strength to be 200, and we're going to drive the strength of this one with a noise texture. So to do that, we'll hit Shift A, and then we'll go to Texture, Noise Texture, and then we're going to use this color to drive the strength and change these values to be 2.6, 0, and 0. And then we're going to use a color ramp to adjust these values to be just black and white with Shift A, Converter, Color Ramp, and then let's make the black flag at 0.2, or 0.3 actually, and then we'll make the white flag at 0.7. Let's move these over because we're going to add in a math node to multiply this by 1,000. So Shift A, Converter, Math, drag it over here, change this to multiply, and the value is 1,000. And what this should start to look like is really bright. But from our camera's point of view, what it should look like is this ring of light, and it's starting to look pretty cool. We might need to adjust this a little bit. We'll know better once we get further along, but for now, this looks perfect. Then we're going to grab our other ring light back here and grab our material that we set up that we did not name. So let's quickly name it ring light front, and then we're going to duplicate that and make one for the back. And all we're going to do for this one is just change the multiply value by 150, and we are done with that one. So now if we look, we should see both of these lighting up, and the back one, it looks like our normals got messed up on this object somehow. So let's just fix that with going into edit mode with tab and then hit Control N, and now we should start to see, there we go, the colors of that object. So if we look at that now, cool, that's looking exactly how I want it, where we've got this kind of thicker, bluer ring in the back and a brighter ring up front. Awesome. So let's save really quick, and now we can go on to the really fun part, which is adding a sphere that looks like thin plastic. So we'll go back into the default view, and what I'm going to do is probably move this up a little bit so that it's closer to our camera. I'm just moving it on the y-axis. There we go. And then I'll hit Shift S to snap my cursor to the selected object here. And then I'm going to hit Shift A and add a UV sphere. I'll want to make sure Generate UVs is on, and set the shading to smooth, and give it a subsurf level of 2 with Control 2. And we can go ahead and add a new material for this. So we'll go into Compositing View, add a new material, and we'll call this Thin Plastic. Oh, and one quick thing that I forgot is we actually need to add a solidify modifier. So we'll do that and make sure that it's above the subsurf. And we're going to leave it at the default thickness. This is pretty thin for this object. You can't really tell how thin it is, but if I zoom in over here, you can see it's pretty thin. Let's switch this diffuse material to our principled shader, which is a new shader, and go down to principled. And then we're going to make sure that the color is here, almost white, but not completely white. Turn down the specular, turn down the roughness, and turn the transmission all the way up. If you want, you could add a little bit of roughness, but I found that it just kills my render times. So then we'll select this node and hit Control T to add our mapping and image nodes over here. And then what we'll do is we will grab our assets folder and select our normal map that we used. or that we created with JSPlacement. Make sure you're using non-color data. And then we need to convert this into a normal node over here. So let's just give ourselves some room and then go into vector, normal map, and then we'll put the color of our normal map into here, the normal into the normal socket. Make sure you're using that UV map, and this should be perfect. So if we preview our material over here, it looks like a solid thing of glass, and that's because this doesn't know that we're using a thin material because we use that solidify modifier. So if we look at what our camera is looking at here, we can quickly see it's starting to add a bunch of little edges and surfaces to reflect on, and this is looking pretty cool. I'll make it so that this sphere is a little bit smaller by scaling it down with S, and then I'm going to move it in front of that ring just a little bit, just so that it's not touching it. Also, a tip that I just want to show you really quick has nothing to do with this object or this scene, but if you have a plane and you're using one of those displacement materials that we set up, here we go. If you want to change the displacement, even though this is completely flat, you can change it by scaling the object in the axis that the displacement is affecting it. So if you want the displacement to be higher or lower, you can scale it on the z-axis for this example. I just thought that was really cool. I didn't know that was a thing, so I thought I'd share it with you. So let's give this a quick render and see what we get. All right, the render has finished, and I noticed a couple things that I want to change. I want to zoom the camera in a little bit so that I don't see the top and bottom of the sphere, even though it looks pretty cool. I just think it looks a little bit too busy. I also want to make the closer ring a little bit darker and the back ring a little bit brighter, and I want to brighten up those bars on the side, the bar lights, the stretched out lights, to be a little bit brighter. So let's start with the lights actually first. So I'm going to change this view over here just to be an outline view, just so I can quickly pick my items. So I believe it's this one. Yep, my stretched ones. I'm going to change the multiply value to 25 just to make them nice and bright. I'm going to move the camera a little bit closer. So I will do that by just right-clicking here. And I'm going to move it until the top is not being shown. So I'm just going to hit GY and drag down a little bit. That looks about right. And let's also fix the light rings to be a little bit better. So the backlight I need to be a little bit stronger. So I'll make that 200. And the front light I need to be a little bit darker. So I'll go to 800 here. Save that, and let's also do a couple things with the end result. So let's use nodes here, and I'm going to add in a filter, glare, and I'll change it to fog glow, and let's change the threshold to 0.8 and save that and give this another quick render. I noticed a couple things that I wanted to do a little differently, so I'm just going to select this back light here and go back into my shader node here. I'm going to change the value up to 200, and I'm going to make this saturation value a lot higher, like something like that, and bring the brightness up a little bit too. That will definitely help it make it more blue. I'm going to bring this multiply value up to 500. I'm also going to change my side lights to be pure white with just dragging this up and changing the saturation to 0. And I'm going to bump the value up to 50 here. And let's see if that fixes all of our problems now. Well, that's it. I hope you learned a lot about creating a futuristic tunnel with JSPlacement in Blender. Don't forget, if you want to get free resources and great tutorials like this straight into your inbox, sign up for the Daring Dino newsletter at daringdino.com/newsletter and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.